The graves may turn out to be the oldest war cemetery on the continent, and they've set off one of the biggest military history investigations on either side of the border. There is an eerie feeling to all this.
If you get immersed into a subject very much, as you can almost feel as if you know these people.
26 skeletons, almost certainly all American soldiers who died in a field hospital set up here during the War of 1812 on the shores of Lake Erie. The site was discovered during excavations for a new condominium. This project is a gold mine for archaeologists and military historians, especially for Americans. For them, it's opening up a little explored chapter of their frontier history. Both Canadian and American experts, military and civilian, pathologists, doctors, anthropologists, are pitching in. Colonel Joe Whitehorn, an expert with the U.S. Army's historical section at the Pentagon.
The army that crossed the Niagara River was a well-trained army in the European sense, and it was able to confront some of Wellington's veterans on a par and give as good as they got. And obviously what we're learning here is that there are people in support, the quartermasters and the surgeons and so forth, were equally professional by this time. So it's the first professional campaign of the new Republic's little army.
Whitehorn has a staff of 9 researching old records in Washington, and then there's a backup staff of several hundred others.
In this case, we have a shattered right femur or upper leg bone. A shot has come in and shattered.
The grisliness of the killing business comes across still.
In this area, the ribs are gone and ends of the ribs can be seen with the fracture marks. We have the pelvic area is completely shattered. This individual suffered from a very severe hit, perhaps even a cannonball.
The dig is providing a new picture of an old army. Some surprises so far.
The age of these people is greater. I'm finding examples of 50-year-old privates, 40-year-old privates. I'd say the average age of these regiments is probably 26 to 28, and relatively few young adolescents. So very few young boys went off to war, apparently.
The teeth. Everyone's amazed at the excellent condition on most of the remains.
We're just looking at a man here who's obviously in his middle age with a good set of teeth. And that may be an identifying factor to the part of the country that they've come from, with a high fluoride or calcium content of some sort.
It may be possible, even now, to learn the names of the Army doctors who treated these men. And perhaps, just maybe, it may be possible to put names and hometowns to some of the slain. Sometime next spring, the remains will be returned to the States for reburial there, probably at the Arlington Cemetery on the outskirts of Washington. In the meantime, last November 11th, on Remembrance Day, someone here left a wreath in tribute to former enemy soldiers slain a century and a half ago. Dan Bjarnason, CBC News, Fort Erie, Ontario.
Last fall, the skeletons started peeking through the soil at a condo construction site in Fort Erie. The experts descended. They measured, dusted, inspected to get to the bottom of this archaeological mystery.
Just 2 buttons up in that area, indicating perhaps just undergarment.
And it was the buttons that helped undo the mystery. Metal buttons still there long after the clothes were gone, still there lodged between the bones.
These are all buttons with motifs. Some of them, as in this one, the U.S. motif, U.S. stamped right on the button.
At a news conference in Toronto today, the experts talked about what they found out. There were 28 bodies on the site. It was an American war cemetery for American soldiers all killed in the War of 1812. Fire! That was the battle the British and Americans fought in Canada before it was Canada. The first war the Americans lost. It was a brutal fight.
We would note that most of the injuries resulted from small missiles, such as bullets, small shrapnel, and grape shot.
Maybe worse than the fatal injury was the cure.
This is part of a femur. It's been amputated.
Many of the remains had arms and legs amputated. Doctors then didn't have time for complicated surgery. It was basic. Cut off the wounded limb with no anesthetic. The soldiers were mostly young, between 20 and 24. They were on average 5'7", and they were buried in a foreign land.
But that will change soon. At the end of this month, the Americans will repatriate the skeletons. In Fort Erie, there will be a special American-Canadian military ceremony, and each skeleton will have its own hearse and be driven to a military cemetery in New York State. Lynn Whittam, CBC News, Toronto.
Dawn at Old Fort Erie. What remains of 28 American soldiers lie waiting to go home. The soldiers' bodies were discovered last year. Archaeologists rate the find as an 11 on a scale of 1 to 10. The remains date back to the days when medical treatment involved shots of whiskey and a saw. The soldiers were likely killed during the last skirmish of the War of 1812, the war in which the Americans tried to take control of Canada. What's happening today shows that adversaries of long ago have become the best of friends. On the battleground of Old Fort Erie, Canadian and U.S. troops trade places. This transfers the remains into U.S. hands. The event attracted hundreds of American veterans. Some drove all night to witness a piece of history.
We believe in bringing the bodies back home, our missing men, with no matter what war.
It marks 174 years of peace between two nations, the largest unguarded border in the world. And to me, that's real significant.
It touches us deeply, and we're not going to forget it.
Hearses from funeral homes in the Buffalo area carried the caskets over the Peace Bridge. Then it was on to a burial ceremony south of Rochester. Men who came to Canada in anger, going home with honor. Stu Patterson, CBC News on the Peace Bridge, Fort Erie.